Hi everyone and welcome back to the fantasyfootballfix.com YouTube channel with me, Tom Campbell, for another Elite 11 team reveal going into Game Week 10. We've got Corey joining us again on the channel this week. We're going to look back at his Game Week 9 points. We're going to get his plans ahead of Game Week 10 and we're going to take a look at all of the stats over the last 4 game weeks. So without further ado, guys, let's get right into it. Guys, welcome back to the channel. And Corey, welcome back. It's been a minute, my friend. It's been a little while. So let's take a little look at this graph and you can give me the rundown. How's your season been going?
It's pretty much up and down, as you can see. I think game week 5 was my high point. I started out, first 2 game weeks were terrible. And then 3 was great and 4 was solid. And then by 5, I was in not bad shape, but I've had less than stellar results the last couple weeks, which is probably not unique in that scenario. There was very few, it seemed like, people who scored. So if you had those players, you did great. But if you didn't, you kind of just fell off. So yeah, not an awful start, but certainly not great either.
No, I can see. And, you know, the game's obviously changed a little bit, Corey, with the acquisition or being able to accumulate loads of free transfers and what have you. People have been commending the price points at the beginning of the season and what have you. Just talking, you know, we've got a sample now of 9 game weeks worth. Do you think the game is markedly different this season? I'm seeing so many elite managers get off to slow starts. What do you put it down to? Is it just variance, or do you think the game is fundamentally harder or different this season? What are we attributing this to?
Yeah, the pricing is definitely much better, and it does make it much more challenging. I mean, I think we're all right now. There's 4 or 5 elite attackers, maybe, and you can't have them all. And so there's a give and take, and you know, there's fundamental decisions that I think have to be made, and I don't necessarily know which are right or wrong, as you can tell, but you have to make those sacrifices, and I've made mine on the defensive side, and that just hasn't worked out. Because basically the kind of the mid-tier attackers, like Solanke and Watkins and what have you, they really have not responded the way that I thought they were, or I even expected. And so what you're seeing is those tiers, and if you don't have the really good players, it seems like you're better off just taking cheaper options like a Wood or you know, even Roger, and just starting them and then playing better in the back. So I think that's what it's been so far. I don't know if it's going to continue that way though. So that's all of it.
Yeah, fair enough. And we're going to take a look at your Game Week 9 points in just a moment. You mentioned Ollie Watkins though, Corey, just before we do. You and I have obviously conversing on the Slack channel throughout the course of pre-season and what have you. You've been pretty high on him as well. What's your read carrying on with Ollie Watkins? Obviously, we've got 9 game weeks worth of data now. They've got the Champions League performance as well. You've got off the back of last season as well. What's your read on Ollie Watkins at the moment, Corey?
Yeah, I mean, I've had him the whole time. So
Yeah, you have.
one of the very few people who have. He clearly wasn't fit when he started,
No.
but some of the other options I didn't really like. Now, if I'd have gone Wood, who's probably my 3rd choice, I certainly would be in a better position than I am. But
Sure.
um, I think Villa were doing quite well. They're kind of beat up, right? And they're starting to get a little healthy now again, but they were struggling there with injuries and fixture congestion and what have you. But he was still continuing on. His underlines were very good. He's averaging, I think, like 5.7 points per match, give or take. And you can't really complain. Now, he is expensive. So, you know, I think I like to see him above that 6-point threshold. But, you know, if the assist this week doesn't get, if that assist doesn't get canceled, he's right there. Or if he would have scored any of the like 9 big chances he had in the first 3 game weeks, he would have been fine. So he's not as big a problem as someone like Solanke, who just, I don't know what's going on there.
Yeah, we'll talk about
so I'm going to stick with him until until I have enough transfers to deal with him if I want. He's just kind of steady Eddie as it goes.
Yeah, I see. All right, cool. Well, I'm sure we'll talk about him, and you mentioned Solanke as well, so that's a nice little segue to see how Game Week 9 played out. Okay, so we can see some pretty sort of popular names here, Corey. We always start with the defensive groups. There's not a lot of points to talk around here, but I'm still super interested as to how you've arrived at this group of players and what your thoughts are. Let's start with the positives. I've been really impressed with Aina and Nottingham Forest at large as well. I presume that he's not going anywhere. Any thoughts on whether or not Forest are good enough defensively to offer up a double defensive option potentially ongoing, or is one and Aina alone sufficient there?
I think they're plenty solid. I think if people are believers in underlying data and XG, and it obviously depends on which one you're going with.
Yeah,
But Forest has been top 10 defensively last year and this year,
they have.
and they've been top five most. So I would not have a problem. I really wish I would have gone Sells um, on wild card, but the thing about last year was their goalkeeping was just awful. But this year it's been adequate, and so they've started to capture some of those clean sheets where last year they might have allowed a goal here and there. But they almost never get blown out, so you're never getting like negatives. Usually it's usually they have a chance. So Aina is literally, now that Gabriel's hurt, he's literally the only defender I'm happy with, and have been for like weeks.
Which sounds peculiar, right? With Gabriel, obviously with the injury doubt there, and Arsenal starting the season in the way that they did. Let's move on and talk about him and talk about Arsenal defensively as a unit there, Corey. What's your read now? Are they faltering to the stage where we don't want to acknowledge them defensively in FPL? Is it getting that severe now? What's your thoughts on Arsenal defensively?
I really don't think so. They've played like 120 minutes down a man or something out of the 800 minutes. So they've played like somewhere around 50% of their game time has been down a man, and they're still fine. Yeah, there's no reason to worry about them defensively. Now, the worry is the price points on all the defenders are so high, except unless you think Timber is going to stay nailed, or and is he? I don't know. So the challenge obviously is the price point, and they certainly have not been quite as good as attacking threat. A lot of that is due to injuries as well. Odegaard obviously is a huge loss for them. They don't really have anyone to replace him, and that's pretty much been evident. So, you certainly, yes, the next couple of weeks with their fixtures, you'd probably be fine not starting Gabriel anyways. But I certainly wouldn't worry about having them, and you're going to want them going forward. It's just a question of one or two, and with two, it starts getting a bit pricey, and that's where those kind of discussions come in on sacrifices.
I see. I mean, maybe we can talk around Spurs as a collective. I was going to move on to Romero there. So, you picked up a colossal 5 points between your three Spurs assets then, Corey. Not to rub it in, I had an equally shite game week, so this is not personal to you at all. But Tottenham, we're going to come on and look at statistics in a minute, in a couple of slides' time. Defensively, as a collective, they're actually scoring really, really well then. But what's going on, man, with this Tottenham team and the FPL assets? You've got Romero, you've got Johnson, you've got Solanke. The floor is yours. What's going on?
The floor might be Ange's in a bit. I don't know. They seem defensively to make like a mistake or two a game, and they just always seem to do something silly. And otherwise, they play a very aggressively high line. And the challenge is that when they make those mistakes, they're usually very good chances that they give up. On top of the fact they just can't figure out set piece defense. It's not quite as bad as last year, but it's still a problem. And so they just they're just not delivering. The attack is what's been really so bad. Solanke's he was great the first five games he played, right? Because he was injured one or two. But the last three, he's barely touched the ball. And so it's just not really working. Johnson I have in there, and he's fine. He's kind of a low volume player. Now the volumes opportunities he gets in there are good. But I'm not super keen on him. So I'm definitely looking to get rid of all three of them by game week 12 when their fixtures change. But I have a lot of other problems, so I'm not entirely sure if that's going to be if that's going to come to fruition. But I certainly do not see Romero and Solanke being on my team come game week 12.
Okay. Well, look, you mentioned other problems as well, Corey. I mean, I'm looking at that midfield with Rogers, who obviously got substituted early, looked a little bit tired, but it's been great and is great value. You've got Mbumo's been a star, right? With his price point being what it is. You mentioned Johnson and Cole Palmer, this incredible FPL option, despite his increase in price from last season. I'm not seeing a bunch of problems there in the midfield, right? What's your thoughts on your midfield complement right now?
Yeah, my midfield's fine. I can see going 5 starters in midfield and then having a cheaper third forward. Obviously, that's when you start talking about Holland versus Salah, or even just dumping Solanke to like an Archer or something, and then upgrading Dibbling to someone in the $7 to $8 million realm. But I think the big challenge is my defense is so terrible that the rest of my attack has to just really outperform. And I've tried to kind of go back to old school before, I say old school, we're talking like, before defenders really were that attacking, when like Leighton Baines was pretty much the main attacking defense. And the standard,
Halcyon days.
Yeah, right. Days. I know the standard model was to rotate a bunch of 4.5s, and that worked. Like it seemed to work, but these days it's just the clean sheets are so few and far between, and so hard to gather. It feels like you just have to go spend more there, and I think that's where my fundamental potential mistake for the season has been, is that I tried to go back, and it just hasn't worked out. Other than and then when I've had the cheap guys, I've missed them, right? I didn't have Ina until my wild card. And Anderson, who was hurt last week, or suspended last week, I had missed out on some of the full and clean sheets earlier because I didn't have him. I had lovely Dan Burn and his like 1 point per game. So that's really been the problem with my team this year, is like literally this 6 points from my defense is kind of like standard. And it's really hard to overcome that on a week-to-week basis.
I get it, man. Definitely. You got a lot of money up front, Corey, as well, with Watkins, Solanke, and Haaland. You've mentioned Salah as well. Just before we go on and look at the bus team ahead of game week 10 there, do you see 3-4-3 as still the optimal setup for the season? We've got some degree of data now to work with. 3-4-3 historically has always been what we end up coming back to, right, as a collective. Do you still think 3-4-3 is the play? If you had a wild card now, is that the formation that you'd be landing on?
If I had a wild card, no. So given the fixture changes, if I had a wild card, I'd swap Holland and Salah. But without a wild card, it's really difficult to get from Holland to Salah, unless you've banked some transfers. Because I can do that, but then I'm just running around with Solanke and Johnson and playing at City in game week 12, and then there are other terrible fixtures they have upcoming. So then you start thinking, well, do you really want to do that? And you're going to want Saka back most likely in 12 because he's just been phenomenal, right? So then it starts being difficult to fit everyone in. It does. So I think if I had a wild card, I absolutely would go to a 3-5-2, but without one, it feels like by the time I'm going to get enough transfers to move Holland out, his fixtures are going to turn and I don't want him back. So I have a feeling he's going to be with me for a while.
I see. Okay. You mentioned being with you for a while. That suggests he's going to be part of the game week 10 makeup. So let's take a look at how your bus team's set up ahead of game week 10. Okay, guys. So this is what we've got right now. You've got Romero taking a position on the bench there. I guess we need to get await news of Gabriel defensively and what that injury looks like as well. And I've got to start at the goalkeepers though. Flecken, I've got Flecken as well. Corey, I suspect a lot of people do. He's been massively disappointing, hasn't he? Fabianski's found his way into the team. I'm a West Ham fan. He was pretty good against Man United, I thought there. Any temptation at all to to give him a berth away at Nottingham Forest?
Yeah, I probably will swap those.
Mm-hmm.
Areola has been, as you know, as
Oh,
a West Ham fan,
oh,
so bad. Like,
so
I don't
bad.
think,
So bad.
who was it? Was it Chelsea? Who was it 2 weeks ago that he just,
Um,
no, it was
they
Tottenham,
it
right?
was
It
the
was,
Spurs.
yeah,
It
it
was
was
the
Tottenham.
Spurs game where they won 4-1, and it was absolutely shambolic. Yeah, it
Like,
was dreadful.
every single goal, but maybe one, he should have stopped.
Hmm.
It was just atrocious. So, and
Yeah.
he's been pretty bad for a bit.
Hmm.
Not that Fabianski is great, but
No.
yeah, I think I will probably swap those two. Um, and then going back to Gabrielle, the real option there, I have several options. I've got plenty of money. I could
Hmm.
upgrade him all the way up to Trent if I wanted to.
Hmm.
The challenge is that how do you get Saka back or Salah or another
Okay.
premium in
Yeah.
a few weeks? Um, so I don't know. Eight Nori's there, but Eight Nori, the Wolves defense is terrible. He's on 4 yellows. Do you really want to rely upon someone who's, yeah, he's scored 3 goals, but it's on like, I don't know, 7, 8 shots or something. I mean, yeah, he's probably the best attacking defender in the game, but
Hmm.
I don't know. I don't know. It's difficult. So I don't know what I'm going to do this week.
Okay.
I'm really, really at a loss, to be honest.
Well, that's fine. Let's see if we can help get you there with some stats in the next slide as well. But I'm not going to promise that. You have been pretty high on Anderson and the Fulham team defensively, I guess, as a unit there, Corey. Something that we're going to see is backed up in the stats when we come on to that in a few moments' time as well. They've not been great FPL points returns since the early part of the season. A lot of us are still on Robinson, the fullback, as well. But do you think there's still enough there to say that this is still something, this is a team, bearing in mind how cheap they are as well, that ultimately there's still a chance that these represent good, cheap options, Anderson, Robinson, etc.?
Yeah, I mean Anderson's 4-3, which is why
Yeah,
I ended up going
great
over
price.
Robinson. Um, yeah, they've been great. Silva's just
Mm,
been doing very. I was very. I've been very surprised on how solid defensively they've been after Polina moved. It seemed like he was, their destroyer and key to everything, but they've been able to adjust and they've been great. So he's like everyone else, right? You're rolling the dice. It seems like with these teams on trying to get a clean sheet, but I prefer going with a team that at least statistically looks like they are
yeah.
they have everything set up and they have nice structure versus someone like Brentford, who's I ended up with their goalkeeper who just their defense is just god awful
Yeah.
and wide open nonstop, and it doesn't look like it's going to change at any point. So yeah, no, I think Fulham's a great team if you need a cheap defender for sure.
Definitely. I mean, I totally agree. So we're saying that you're pretty unsure, very unsure as to what you're going to use your one free transfer for, if at all. I guess in that situation, Corey, are we looking at a roll here? Look to bank the transfer, give yourself more options going into game week 11, and see how this motley crew does in game week 10. Is that the likelihood here?
I think so.
Mm-hmm.
Because the Spurs have Ipswich next week, so you don't really want to move
Oh no,
Romero, I wouldn't
not a chance.
think. Colwell has a couple good fixtures coming up, but Chelsea can't seem to keep a clean sheet either, even though they're kind of like the Spurs, where it seems like they'll make a mistake here and there, and then they give up a huge chance where, they're not giving up a ton of chances, but the ones they do are just massive, and they always
Mm-hmm.
seem to concede. So I'm not against making a move for a defender, but I'm not entirely sure that I want Eight Dory. And then, City's fixtures are turning. You don't really want to go there. So then do you want to go to Trent? Well, then he's so expensive. Now you're limiting. And I don't know. I
No,
really don't know.
I get
It's
it.
a big question mark for me. Maybe there'll be an injury or two that clarifies it midweek, but right now I really am not sure what I would do.
Fingers crossed for an injury. That's what we want. That's
Right.
the positivity pours out of us both this week. Definitely. Okay. Well, let's see whether or not some statistics can help clarify some thoughts, guys. So we've got some stats pulled from the last 4 game weeks to try and help us work out what to do ahead of game week 10. Okay, guys. So I mentioned last week as well. This is definitely my favourite part of the show. We've started to rely on these stats a little bit more now. So we've got 4 game weeks worth of data being returned here. These are average statistics for at individual level. We've got XG, we've got shots, expected FPL points, which is a nice FPL metric that the fantasyfootballfix.com algorithm returned as well on the stats page that you can go and check out. Attempted assists as well, shots in the box, and then the team metric of defensive performance in terms of expected goals conceded. Let's start there, Corey. Right, so this is the last 4. We didn't talk about Bournemouth, did we, in the last page? Is this the route that we should all be going down and actually filling our team with Bournemouth defensive assets, who are the only team to be returning less than a goal a game in terms of XG conceded over the last 4? That's fun, right? This is funny quirk there.
So I would say, yeah, they're playing City. I would say no. But they were bad at times last year. Then they kind of collapsed like the last eight games. I think it was after I picked up Neto in my wild card that they kind of, well, what the hell?
Yeah.
But again, he seems to know what he's doing. That team has great structure, and they're solid. So
yeah, maybe not with Man City playing. It's a fair point. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and I think they have another tough game coming up soon as well.
They do. Yeah, as a Semenyo owner,
I think their fixtures are.
Yeah. And what about the other? So you've got
the future.
So yeah, joking apart there, we've got Spurs, Liverpool, Fulham and Villa, sort of more traditional teams there, I guess, from an FPL selection perspective to consider. Then, Corey, do you like any of those teams defensively over the next handful of fixtures? I'm wondering whether or not it's worth looking for cheap options from those 4 in terms of making some money available as we all look to potentially pivot away from Erling Haaland. What do you think? Anything?
Yeah, I mean the Spurs we talked about, right? They don't give up a lot of chances, but the ones they do seem to be massive. And
sure.
So one of the things people who maybe aren't statistically inclined, don't necessarily grasp when it comes to XG is one of the reasons why you always hesitate to look at it on an individual game basis is because when you give up big chances, like very high chances that are great quality, or you produce those, you're more likely to score. Now, if you give up 1 XG over 10 shots, well, each one's a 10% chance, right? If you just do the math like that. And so your chances of scoring are much less if you gave up 1 with 1 shot that's 0.9 and 1 shot that's 0.1, right? So 0.9 by definition is going to go in about 90% of the time. And so when it comes to defenses in FPL, it's such a binary, right? Because the clean sheet is so important that you kind of want to try and it's kind of a catch-22. You don't want a lot of chances, but you'd almost prefer a team give up a lot of smaller chances like Forest, Fulham to an extent. Brentford, when they were good, used to do that, but
and Burnley back in the day. Sean Dyche's Burnley. Yeah.
Yes. Pope would have like 12 saves, and but none of them would be that. It'd be like, oh, they did give up like 1.2 or so. Versus the Spurs, who might give up 3 chances, or 2 or 0.5 each, and then the other one's a short one. And like it's more likely they're gonna concede the goal, just like against West Ham, right? They only gave up, I think, 2 shots in that game that were worth anything, but one of them was a huge chance. And so it's a challenge, right? And so you get these teams like Spurs, especially when defenders aren't that cheap. You don't know. Liverpool. The thing about Liverpool, their goalkeepers just continuously play amazingly. So maybe that's their secret, is that they just have better goalkeepers than everyone else.
Yeah, it matters,
I don't know, but
it does matter.
Yeah, I mean, they're great defensively, so don't get me wrong. It's just their clean sheet record makes it seem like they're maybe better than they actually are. And it comes down to how good Allison and Kelleher are been. So going back to your question, I mean, I like Fulham quite a bit. Villa, Villa's okay, and you can get Paul and Konza for affordable options, but I think you just have to figure out what fits into your team structure and try and find some money for defense. I think that's ultimately where I'm going to have to go.
I get it, man. Let's move away from the boring defensive chat, which is so hard to isolate these clean sheets anyway. There's some names here which are coming up for the first time, right? It does my head in that I sold Saka, and now I'm looking at his name up in lights in every one of these charts. So I'm going to have to find a route back for him, right? Let's talk about him, and let's talk about Isak, who's topping the charts for XG over the last 4 game weeks as an average. Obviously, he's not played a whole bunch of minutes, but is this the sort of player that we think actually to get ahead of the curve he could represent an opportunity? What's your thought on Isak as an attacking option for Newcastle, Corey?
Yeah, Newcastle was pretty bad early, and
Mm.
then their fixtures turned, and I think that they've started to improve a touch, but I'd still would want to see some more comprehensive data that
Hmm.
they really have turned the corner. Especially with Wilson coming back eventually, you expect him to cut into Isak's time a bit, or put Isak on the left, which he is just not the same.
Do you think Callum
Gordon is
Wilson's
definitely
still
some.
a viable? He's still a threat to Isak even at this stage of his career. I'm not convinced personally,
I
but
don't
do you see that?
I don't know any. Eddie Howe is like my kryptonite, so don't listen to me. But it seems like he still split time last year until he got hurt pretty much. Maybe
Mm,
he played like 35% of the minutes to Isak's 65, but until Wilson got hurt, he was splitting time. So
okay,
um, yeah, I don't know. And Isak's not cheap, right? He's
he's
up there.
not.
So
Yeah, he'd be a bit
uh,
of a saving
the
on
guy
Ollie
who's on
Watkins,
here,
but not loads. Yeah, go on. Sorry, go on.
yeah, yeah, the guy who's on here who has been legitimately excellent is Raul. Like he has
Oh,
been fantastic, and
mm-hmm.
I can't see them going back to Muniz when he doesn't necessarily have a massive amount of history. Like he got hot for a bit last year, but that's pretty much been his only run.
Mm.
So I think Raul, until something happens, is a great.
Yeah, he is. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, it's funny, isn't it? I mean, if you look at just his returns, right, he would feature in these charts. But we've got XG, we've got shots in the box, and expected FPL points, and his name's not featuring, right? So it does feel odd. But like you say, he keeps scoring, so yeah, there might be something there. What about Saka though, Corey? I need to quiz you on Saka. He's not in your team. He's not in mine. Do we need to get this guy back in the team immediately?
Yeah, I was never going to sell Saka until he got hurt. I was
Exactly.
always
Same.
My plan was to hold and then move Palmer in 12 when I'm shipping out all my Spurs assets. That was my plan. I mean, I obviously thought he was hurt, so it's not a huge issue because Palmer has a great fixture this week. Well, not great, but I mean, Newcastle's not very they're adequate defensively, right? Like I think like 12th maybe. Um, so I'm good with that. But yeah, he's been insane. Like he has
Mm,
been absolutely insane. And I'm not entirely sure what it is about their team this year where so much of the attack has really focused with him. I mean, last year, in the last couple of years, he's been great, but he's getting so many more chances in the box this
yeah.
year than he has. And I haven't really watched him enough to really get a handle on why that is. But um, he's, he's at that age where like this is where you take that next step to really become world class elite, and he's clearly doing that. So I can't imagine. I mean, the challenge is you got Salah, you got Palmer. I'm not as high on Son, but you've got him
Hmm.
as well. You probably can't take all four of them. I don't really see how that's viable. So you got to take three of them at max, and that means you're losing Holland. So I can see not having him at times, but I fully suspect that I'll have him more than I will Salah, actually, just
Yeah.
given the involvement and the price point.
Well, look, you mentioned Salah there as well, Corey. His name's not up in lights here loads, is it? Expected FPL points is where he does feature over the last 4, right, with an impressive 8.8, but seems to return every game week, right? And that's been the case for years and years and years. Do we just need to
It,
find a
it'll,
way to prioritize Salah in this team, even if it's at the expense of Erling Haaland? What's your thought on Mo Salah this season?
so his goal involvement is the lowest it's been since his second year at Roma.
Is that right? Okay.
Or sorry, yeah, yes. I think he's had three penalties, and so
Hmm.
that's been masked a little bit. He's become the creator for them, and it feels like whoever's playing left wing and the nine is getting a ton of back post runs, and that's where his Diaz at the beginning, then Jota, and then Gakpo a little
Mm.
bit. Um, so I'm a bit concerned at his price, given his lack of shot volume in great positions, but it's still very, very good. And as long as he doesn't go through the yips with penalties again, then as long as they keep getting penalties, and he's going to play forever. The guy's made of iron, right? So
Mm.
he's never hurt. Um, it, it's a decision. The thing about Holland though is I know everyone he did have three bad games for him, but last week he had like 20 chances, right? And he only scored one, but he's a force of nature that is beyond Salah. He's beyond anyone, and when it comes to pure volume. And so you definitely can win without it, but there are going to be games probably where you're going to get spanked pretty good. And
Hmm.
so you just got to make sure it's a tough decision.
Yeah.
And it's not one that I can certainly make now because I don't have the transfers to do it. And I think you need to be careful of when you do it because he's just, I know people are like get down on him, but his numbers are just insane.
Yeah, well, we can see as well. I think last week, on my video last week was the first time where he actually dipped out of these charts somewhat, but he's straight back in after that Southampton game in terms of shots in the box, isn't he? And so there's a fair amount of data there to back up um, the risk you run by not having him, definitely. Okay.
But if you haven't had him, if you wild carded out of him in
Mm,
4 or 5 when a lot of people did it, you are doing very well.
you are
Because the
good on you.
alternative captains in Buemo or Salah or Saka or Palmer have just done fantastically well.
Yeah. Any other names on this set of charts that we've got here, Corey, that deserve your attention, or are we happy to wrap this up? Anyone else that you want to flag ahead of calling it for this video?
I mean, I think Havertz remains a solid option, even without Odegaard. So,
Sure.
he's another one in the Isak price point and this lanky price point, just a touch below Watkins. Where I think if you are going to go without Holland, he's a great option as well.
Yeah.
And no one really talks about him. The thing about him is his bonus
Hmm.
is always really
Okay.
poor. And so he kind of, especially when Saka is doing so well, he kind of needs two returns to get bonus points. So that's a bit of a challenge. But he's still in the mix quite a
Hmm.
bit. So
Fair enough. Okay, man. Well, look, I don't think I've been able to clarify anything for you this week, Corey.
yeah,
So
not.
apologies for that, but hopefully the guys viewing have enjoyed it. Anyway, is there anything else you want to get off your chest before we wrap things up?
No, I think we have one more international break, and then we get into the
Yeah.
winter time where it feels like there's going to be a lot of opportunity to take advantage and make some moves. But
Hmm.
it's going to be a crucial part of the season, I think, especially with fewer double game weeks this year. So
Yeah.
we'll see how it goes.
Good. Corey, it's been great to get you back on. Let's get that international break over and done with. And like you say, we can then get loads of FPL fixtures crammed into the festive schedule. It's been great to have you back on, mate. Best of luck for the upcoming game weeks. We'll get you back on the channel soon, guys. Do please smash a like on the video and leave any comments or questions down below if you do have them for Corey or for myself, and we'll be sure to get back with you as soon as we can. And I'll be back with you for another video next week. Take care. Bye-bye.